A tale of black-eyed kids in the forest. I've hesitated to share this, but it's been weighing on my mind, and maybe putting it out there will help me process what happened. This isn't just a spooky story. It's something that actually occurred earlier this year. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and my two closest friends, Sam and Ryan, have been with me through thick and thin. We went to the same high school, played on the basketball team together, and even went to the same university. In May, Ryan's father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. The loss hit Ryan harder than anything I'd ever seen, and he spiraled into a dark place after the funeral. Sam and I did everything we could to support him, but nothing seemed to lift his spirits. Then, one night, Ryan called us and suggested we take a camping trip like we used to. He said he needed a break from the city to clear his head, and Sam and I agreed that it might be just what he needed. We decided on Shawnee National Forest in southern Ohio, a vast, dense area with thick woods and few visitors. Sam had recently bought a small RV camper. Not fancy, but it had the essentials: a couple of bunks, a kitchenette, and most importantly, a heater for cold nights. We packed our gear on a Friday afternoon: sleeping bags, hiking equipment, a cooler of food and drinks, and set off. The drive was filled with our usual joking, though Ryan was more reserved than usual. We didn't push him, we just let him be. When we arrived, we chose a secluded spot off the main trails. We wanted some privacy, far from other campers, so we navigated narrow dirt paths until we found a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Felt right. After setting up, we started a fire, grilled some hot dogs, and spent the evening reminiscing under a sky full of stars. Sam, who's a stargazing enthusiast, lay back and said, "Look at that view. You don't see this back home." I agreed, and it was nice to see Ryan smiling a bit as he sipped his drink. Around midnight, Sam had a wild idea. "I'm sleeping on the roof of the camper tonight," he announced, not wanting to miss the stars. Ryan chuckled. "You're crazy." Sam grinned and climbed up with his sleeping bag. Ryan and I decided to head inside. It was cozy, 2 small bunks with just enough room to stand. As I lay in my bunk scrolling on my phone, I noticed Ryan lying across from me, staring at the ceiling. "Doing okay?" I asked. He sighed. "Yeah, just thinking about Dad. He would have loved this." I nodded, and after a few moments of silence, we began to drift off. Sometime later, a gentle knocking sound woke me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but it came again. A faint, deliberate tap on the camper door. "Ryan, did you hear that?" I whispered. He stirred. "Hear what?" I told him, "Someone's knocking." We both listened, and there it was again. "Maybe it's Sam messing with us," Ryan suggested, just as my phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Are you guys awake?" "Yeah," I replied. "Are you knocking on the door?" His response made my heart skip. "Nope, but I see someone outside." I showed the text to Ryan, who looked as confused as I felt. "Why would kids be out here at this hour?" he asked. "I have no idea," I replied. We decided to investigate. I called out through the door. "Hello? Do you need help?" A small voice replied, "We need to use your phone." Something about the voice felt strange. Too flat, too robotic. "Where are your parents?" Ryan asked. "Please let us in," the voice said again, insistently. I felt an uneasy chill. We can call someone for you. Just give us a number." Silence. The voice repeated, "We need to come in. Let us in." My phone buzzed again with a text from Sam. "Don't let them in. Something's not right." I typed back, "What's wrong?" He replied, "Their eyes. They're completely black." A cold shiver ran through me as I showed the message to Ryan. "What does that even mean?" he whispered. "I don't know, but Sam seems serious," I replied. The knocking grew louder, more demanding. "Let us in," the voices insisted. sounding firmer and more desperate. Trying to keep calm, I called back, "We can get you help, but you'll need to wait outside." "No," the voice insisted. "You must invite us in." Ryan asked, "Why do you need an invitation?" The voice pleaded, "Please, we just want to come in." Another buzz came from Sam. "They're acting weird. They keep looking up here, but it's like they can't see me." I replied, "Should we call for help?" But Sam reminded me we were too far out for reliable cell service. Meanwhile, Ryan was growing more uneasy. "What do we do?" he whispered. "Just keep the door locked," I said. The knocking stopped, and then we heard footsteps circling the camper. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on leaves. Ryan whispered, "They're walking around." We stayed quiet, listening. The footsteps paused right outside one of the windows, and the voice came again, "Please let us in." I cautiously peered through the curtain but could only make out a small figure near the window. Then we heard a soft thump from above. Sam texted, "They're trying to climb up here." I typed back, "Be careful." He replied, "They said something strange. It sounded like, 'Your friends can't help you.'" I showed the text to Ryan, who whispered, "This is getting too weird." Feeling a surge of adrenaline, I opened the door just enough to call Sam inside. As he climbed down from the roof, we heard one of the voices say, "You've made a mistake." We hurried inside and locked the door behind us. "What is going on?" Ryan asked. "I don't know," Sam replied. "But those kids, their eyes were all black." Thinking it might be a prank, I said, "Maybe they're wearing contacts or something." But Sam was adamant, "Not out here, in the middle of nowhere." My phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. "You can't hide from us." My hands shook as I showed it to the others. "Did either of you give out our numbers?" They shook their heads, looking equally bewildered. The footsteps resumed, circling the camper faster this time. "This is messed up," Sam said. Ryan asked, "Should we call for help?" I tried to dial 911, but the call wouldn't connect. "No service," I muttered. Ryan tried his phone too, with the same result. The voices returned, now sounding irritated. "This is your last chance. Let us in." We huddled together, ignoring the voices, hoping they would leave. After what felt like hours, everything finally went silent. Ryan peeked out the window, seeing nothing. "Maybe they're gone," he whispered. We waited another half hour before deciding it was safe. Quietly, we gathered our things and stepped outside. The woods were eerily silent, the fire down to embers. Just as we were about to get into the camper, a voice called out from the darkness, "Do you think you're leaving?" I spun around, but saw nothing. "Who's out here?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. Silence. "Let's just go," Sam urged. We scrambled into the camper, and Ryan started the engine. As we pulled away, the headlights caught two figures at the edge of the clearing. They looked like children, their faces hidden in shadow. "Did you see that?" Ryan muttered, his knuckles white on the wheel. "Just drive," I said. We didn't stop until we reached a gas station miles away. We sat in the brightly lit station, shaken. "What just happened?" Ryan asked, his hands trembling. "I don't know," Sam replied. "But those kids, whatever they were, weren't normal." Back at home, I searched for answers and found numerous stories about black-eyed children, accounts that were eerily similar to ours. I showed my friends the information, and we read through tales of people who encountered children with entirely black eyes who sought entry into homes or vehicles. Ryan eventually started attending grief counseling and seemed to find some peace. He later said to me, "Maybe facing something unexplainable made me realize I can't control everything." I was glad he was healing, but added, "Let's skip camping for a while." We all agreed with nervous laughter. Life settled back to normal, and none of us have received any more strange messages. I hope this was a one-time encounter, something we'll never fully understand. But if you ever find yourself alone in a remote place and hear a knock from someone begging to be let in, think twice before you open that door. Stay safe. Don't go camping in the woods on reservation land. It was a summer tradition. When I was 12, I'd spend my summers visiting family on the reservation while living in the city for the rest of the year. This trip was extra special since I'd have more time with my cousins. Leo, who was 15, Sarah, who was my age, and Max, who was 10. Their cabin lay nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by tall pines and the soothing sounds of nature, a world apart from the city's chaos. The air was crisp, the nights calm, and a peace lingered that was rare anywhere else. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, the grown-ups chatted indoors, laughter floating through the open windows. Leo grinned mischievously. "What if we went camping tonight?" he suggested. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You know, Grandma and Grandpa would never allow it. They've told us 100 times. Don't wander into the woods after dark." Leo just smirked. "That's why we don't tell them," he replied. I could see Max wasn't entirely comfortable. "What if we get caught?" he murmured. I was torn. An adventure under the stars sounded thrilling, but sneaking out, it didn't feel right. "Maybe we could just ask them?" I suggested. Leo shook his head. "They'd just say no." "Come on, it'll be fun. We'll set up a tent, tell stories, and be back by dawn." Sarah turned to me. "What do you think, Sam?" I hesitated but thought about the fun memories this would make. "All right, I'm in, but we have to be cautious."
Max sighed reluctantly.
"Fine, but if we get in trouble, it's on you, Leo." We waited until the house was silent, everyone asleep by midnight. Gathering our supplies, we quietly slipped out the back door and into the woods. The moonlight pierced through branches, lighting up familiar trails that now felt eerie in the dark. After a 15-minute walk, we found a small clearing near a brook, a spot we'd visited many times, but it looked entirely different at night. Setting up the tent was a bit of a struggle, but eventually we managed. Sitting around a small, battery-powered lantern, we basked in the low light, surrounded by the symphony of crickets and an occasional owl hoot. "Who's got a scary story?" Leo asked, rubbing his hands.
"Ido!"
Sarah exclaimed. "Ever heard of the Shadow Raven?"
Max shuddered.
"I hate that story. Too bad," she teased. "The Shadow Raven is an evil spirit that steals the souls of the sick to add years to its own life. It can appear as a raven or a human, but only shamans can see its true form." "That's creepy," I admitted. "How about this one?" Leo interjected. "The dear lady?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "You know that's just meant to keep kids out of the woods." "Whatever. They say she appears as a beautiful woman to lure people into the forest. But once they're far enough, she reveals her true form, hooves for feet and a deer-like face." Max looked truly frightened. "Can we talk about something else?" I tried to lighten the mood. "How about the legend of the sky beings, benevolent creatures who came down to share wisdom with our ancestors?" "That's not scary," Leo objected, shaking his head. "Exactly," I said, smiling. But Leo wasn't done. He looked around and lowered his voice. "Grandpa told me something once. Something he said was true." Sarah glanced at him warily. "What are you talking about?" "He said that when he was younger, he saw a skin shifter. The mood shifted instantly. We'd all heard of these dark figures, sorcerers who transform into animals to cause harm. Our elders rarely discussed them, and when they did, it was with a sense of foreboding." "Leo, maybe we shouldn't talk about that," Sarah whispered. "Come on, it's just a story." Max hugged his knees. We should listen to Sarah. But now I was curious. What did Grandpa say? Leo took a deep breath. One night, he was helping his father gather wood and got separated. Suddenly, he saw a coyote standing on its hind legs, staring at him. At first, he thought he was seeing things, but then it started walking toward him, its body twisting unnaturally. He froze, terrified. Its face looked like a human's, stretched and distorted over the coyote's skull. It whispered his name in a voice that wasn't human. He ran home, and his father performed a ceremony to protect him. We sat in silence, the forest seeming to grow even quieter, as if it was listening. Sarah looked furious. Why would you tell us that? It's just a story, Leo muttered, though he looked a bit uneasy himself. Do you think they're real? Max asked in a small voice. I wasn't sure what to believe. Let's just go to sleep, I suggested finally. We all agreed and crawled into the tent. It was cramped but comforting to be close together. Lying there, I found it hard to sleep. Every sound from outside startled me. Hours passed, and finally, at around 3 a.m., I started to doze off until I heard it. A faint shuffling, like someone dragging their feet through the leaves. Did you hear that? I whispered. Sarah rolled over to face me. Hear what? Shoo, Leo hissed. The shuffling grew louder, followed by a soft, labored breathing. Max sat up, eyes wide with fear. What is that? He mouthed. Leo reached for his flashlight, signaling for us to stay silent. Slowly, he unzipped the tent, just enough to peek outside. We all crowded around, straining to see. First, there was nothing. Then, from behind a tree, a figure appeared. It had the body of a coyote, but with grotesque, elongated limbs, patches of missing fur, and skin stretched tight over bones. But the head was worst of all, like someone had forced a human face over a coyote skull. Its sunken eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth hung open in a twisted, silent scream. It moved jerkily, circling our camp, wheezing with each step. We held our breath, too terrified to move. Max clutched my arm, squeezing tightly. Leo lowered the tent flap and turned off the flashlight. Stay quiet, he whispered. Maybe it'll go away. We huddled together, listening to the creature shuffle around us, closer and closer. Suddenly, we heard it whisper, "Help me." Its voice sounded distorted, like someone imitating human speech. Max began to cry softly. Sarah covered his mouth to muffle him. Don't respond, Leo mouthed. The creature pressed against the tent, its shadow looming, its rotten smell permeating the air. Why won't you help me? It rasped. I shut my eyes, silently praying it would leave. After what felt like hours, the shuffling began to fade, and the wheezing grew distant until, finally, the forest's natural sounds returned. Dawn was still hours away, but none of us dared to sleep. When daylight finally broke, we packed up quickly. No one spoke as we exited the woods, returning home to find our family waiting on the porch, looking angry and worried. Where have you been? Grandma demanded. Leo looked down. We went camping, after we specifically told you not to. Grandpa's voice was stern. Sarah stepped forward, apologizing. Once inside, we gathered at the kitchen table, and Grandpa looked at us seriously. Did anything happen out there? We exchanged looks, and I finally spoke up. Yes, sir. We saw something. He nodded as if he'd expected it. Leo described the creature, its twisted body and human-like face, and Grandpa listened intently before saying, "It's what our people call they who change." Why didn't you warn us? Sarah asked. Because speaking of them draws them close, Grandma explained gently. That afternoon, our family performed a cleansing ritual, filling the cabin with the scent of sage. The experience stayed with me long after, a reminder to respect the unknown and heed the advice of those before us. Even today, I sometimes think about that night, grateful for the lessons we learned the hard way. Hide behind encounter story. Growing up on a 250-acre family farm meant plenty of space to wander, the freedom to explore, and a solitude you can rarely find elsewhere. By the time I was 17, I was used to hard work. My dad managed the farm with a firm but fair approach, and I gladly helped out when I could. One summer evening, Dad mentioned he needed some trees cleared in the furthest part of the woods and offered me a good rate for the work. More than usual. I was saving up to buy a second-hand dirt bike from a friend, so I jumped at the chance. The next morning, I packed up the truck with all the tools I'd need, loading everything in a sturdy trailer Dad let me use. The part of the woods he wanted cleared was a fair distance over rough trails, in an area we didn't visit often. By the time I reached the spot, the sun was sinking, casting a golden glow across the fields. The drive took about half an hour, and the path became narrower and more overgrown as I went deeper. When I finally arrived, I took a moment to appreciate the quiet. Tall trees surrounded me, and the wind whistled through the leaves. I began work, the chainsaw's buzz filling the air. The first few trees came down smoothly. Then, out of nowhere, I felt like I was being watched. I paused, cutting the engine and listening. Just the usual forest sounds, so I shrugged it off and kept working. A couple of hours later, during a break, I noticed something odd. One of the trees I'd felled earlier was missing.
I åkte over, puzzled.
The stump was cleanly cut, but the tree itself was nowhere to be seen. I looked around, thinking maybe I'd dragged it off and forgotten, but there was no sign of it. Shaking it off, I went back to work. As the day wore on, strange little things started to bother me. Shadows seemed to flicker just outside my vision, and once I thought I heard faint laughter. Probably just the wind, I told myself, since I was the only one out there. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Long after sunset, I sat down for a late meal. While eating, I felt that prickling sensation again, the hairs on my neck rising. I scanned the area, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, I heard a rustling sound about 20 yards away. Bushes shook as if something large was moving through them. I stood up. "Hello," I called out, but no response. Animals like deer or foxes were common, even a bear now and then, but this felt different. I decided to finish up quickly, packing the last logs onto the trailer. By then, it was deep into the night, and the woods were silent except for the nocturnal sounds starting up. I checked my watch. Midnight had come and gone without me noticing. I called home, letting Mom know I'd camp out there for the night rather than drive back in the dark. After hanging up, I set up a simple camp with a small tent I kept in the truck. I started a small fire, cooking canned beans and hot dogs, enjoying the quiet. Dad had lent me a book about history, and I read it for a while by the fire. After a bit, I tossed another log on the fire, listening to the crackling. The stillness was soon interrupted by the sound of dry leaves crunching, like someone stepping nearby. I looked up, staring into the dark just beyond the fire's glow. Just an animal, I told myself, though the sense of being watched had returned, more intense than before. I decided to turn in, dousing the fire and leaving only a few embers before crawling into my tent. Lying there, I couldn't shake the feeling of something lurking outside. Eventually, I fell asleep, only to be woken by a loud thud. My eyes shot open. The noise had come from near the truck. I listened, catching faint, irregular breathing sounds. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moonlight made everything look eerie, casting shadows, but nothing seemed out of place at first. Then I saw it. A shadow moving from tree to tree, too large to be any animal I knew. Stayed just out of full view, like it knew where I'd be looking. Grabbing my flashlight, I pointed it toward the trees, my hand shaking. The breathing grew louder, moving closer. Then, for a second, I saw something, a tall, thin figure slipping behind a tree. I knew I needed to get out of there. Slowly, I backed into the tent, packed my few belongings, and emerged cautiously, heading for the truck. The trailer was heavy with logs, and maneuvering it quickly wasn't going to be easy. My heart pounded as I unhitched it, metal clanging in the quiet night. Then, from behind me, I heard a low growl. I didn't dare look back. Jumping into the truck, I floored it, the tires spinning before catching traction. I sped down the trail, branches scraping the sides. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shadowy figure on the path, but it vanished as I rounded a bend. When I finally reached the farmhouse, I parked and just sat there, gripping the wheel. I didn't tell my parents everything, just that I'd come back early. They noticed the missing trailer, and I said I'd left it, planning to retrieve it the next day. That night, I barely slept, thinking of what I'd seen. The next morning, Dad and I drove back. The trailer was still there, loaded with logs, and everything seemed normal in the daylight. "Why'd you leave it out here?" Dad asked. I muttered something about trouble maneuvering, and we hitched it up. Before we left, I glanced back at the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something slip behind a trunk, but it could have been just shadows. Back at the house, I went to the bookshelf in Dad's study. I remembered reading a book on folklore years ago, and I found it, scanning the pages until I came to an entry on a creature called the Hide-Behind. The Hide-Behind was said to stalk those alone in the woods, staying just out of sight. It could twist its body to hide behind the thinnest trees, leaving victims with a sense of dread and the feeling of being watched before they disappeared without a trace. The similarities were too eerie. I casually asked Dad, "Ever hear stories about weird stuff in the woods?" He chuckled. "Your grandpa used to tell tales about strange creatures, some old lumberjack legends." When I mentioned the Hide-Behind, he nodded. "All legends have a sliver of truth," he said. "Best to be careful out there." From then on, I stayed closer to the farm. A few weeks later, I shared the story with a friend who surprised me by not laughing. "You're not the only one," he said. "Old-timers around here tell stories of strange happenings, too. Some won't go into the woods after dark anymore." It was oddly comforting but unsettling to know I wasn't alone. Now I'm careful whenever I'm out there. The woods feel different, both captivating and unnerving. What do you think? Do you believe in the Hide-Behind? The Beast is here last summer. My friend Sarah and I planned a trip to Italy. We had both just finished university and wanted to take a little adventure before starting our jobs. After saving up money from part-time work, we planned a 2-week journey across the Italian countryside. We started our trip in Rome, ticking off all the major sites like the Colosseum and the Vatican. But our true interest lay off the beaten path. So we made our way south to explore rural regions for what we called the real Italy. One area that drew our attention was the region of Avellino. Sarah had come across it in a mystery book, fascinated by tales of a creature known as the Beast of Avellino, which supposedly haunted the area centuries ago. I'm a bit of a history enthusiast, so I was excited too. We arrived in a small mountain village named Foligno, with cobblestone roads and old stone houses. The locals were welcoming but became quiet whenever we mentioned the beast. One elderly woman even crossed herself and muttered something under her breath. We found a small inn for the night and planned a hike through the nearby forest. The innkeeper, an older man named Franco, advised us to stick to the marked trails. "People get lost easily," he said in his heavy accent. "And the wolves have been seen more often lately." "Wolves?" Sarah's eyes lit up, and he reassured us that they usually avoided humans. The next morning, we packed some snacks and set off. The forest was beautiful, with tall trees overhead and the smell of fresh pine all around. Birds chirped as we hiked along, making the experience everything we'd hoped for. After a couple of hours, we came across a narrow, overgrown path not on our map. Sarah, ever the explorer, wanted to take it. "Come on, Emily," she insisted, tugging my arm. "This is exactly what we came for." I hesitated. "Franco said to stay on the trail," I replied. She rolled her eyes, saying, "Are you afraid the beast is going to get us?" I laughed and followed her. The path led us deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the light dimmed. It was eerie but also enchanting. After about an hour, we discovered a clearing with the ruins of an old stone cabin, moss-covered and reclaimed by nature. Curious, we decided to look around. "I wonder who lived here," Sarah said, touching the rough stone. I noticed strange carvings on one of the walls, odd symbols rather than words. "Check this out," I called to Sarah. She squinted at them, saying, "Maybe it's an old language." Just then, we heard a rustling in the trees behind us. We both froze, and I whispered, "It's probably just an animal." Sarah, suddenly unsure, suggested we head back. As we turned, I glimpsed a large, dark figure moving through the trees. "Did you see that?" I asked, heart pounding. "See what?" she replied. We stood together, staring at the forest, which had fallen into an eerie silence. "Let's go," Sarah whispered, and we hurried back the way we came, trying to keep calm. Every so often, I heard a snap or rustle behind us. Glancing back, I saw nothing, but an unsettling feeling grew. Soon, we realized we had lost our original trail. "Are we lost?" I asked, trying to keep calm, but Sarah was insistent, looking around for familiar landmarks. We pulled out the map, but it was useless. Under the thick forest canopy, our phones had no signal, and the GPS wasn't working. I took a deep breath. "Okay, let's retrace our steps." Just then, a low growl came from the trees. Both of us heard it. Sarah tried to joke that it might be my stomach, but I could tell she was frightened. We started moving faster, the growling sound getting closer. Suddenly, Sarah screamed, and I turned to see a huge animal step out of the shadows. It looked like a wolf, but much larger, with tangled fur and glowing yellow eyes. "Run!" I shouted, and we sprinted through the trees, branches scratching our arms and faces. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind us. My lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed me on. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah tripped on a root and fell. I skidded to a stop, rushing back to help her. "Come on," I urged, pulling her to her feet. The creature was closing in, snarling. In a panic, we turned left and spotted a rocky incline. Scrambling up, hoping it couldn't follow. At the top, we stumbled onto a marked trail. Relief washed over me as I pointed to a sign showing the way back to the village. But before we could catch our breath, the beast appeared below, staring up with its piercing eyes. It let out a howl that echoed through the trees. "Go!" Sarah shouted, and we raced down the trail, the creature out of sight but fear driving us onward. After what felt like forever, we burst out of the forest and onto a road, where a van was parked. An older man unloading crates looked up, startled. We ran toward him, gasping, "Please help us." He waved us into the van without hesitation, and we sped back to the village. "What happened?" he asked in broken English. "Something chased us," Sarah replied, catching her breath. He nodded, muttering, "The beast." Back at the inn, Franco took one look at us and sighed. "You left the trail, didn't you?" We apologized, saying we had seen something in the woods that defied belief. Franco shook his head. "The beast is not just a tale. Many have seen it." When Sarah asked why no one did anything about it, he shrugged. "It's a curse that haunts this land. That night, we locked our door and closed the shutters, barely sleeping. The next morning, we cut our trip short, heading back to Rome. Before we left, Franco handed me a small pendant with a protective symbol. For safety, he said. We thanked him and left, eager to put distance between us and those dark woods. Back in Rome, the whole experience seemed surreal, but the nightmares that followed reminded me it had been real. Sarah and I don't talk about it much. When people ask about our trip, we focus on the highlights, the historic sites, the food, the art. No one would believe our story anyway, but I sometimes wonder what else is out there, lurking in the hidden parts of the world. We were lucky to escape Avellino alive.